Hello there and welcome back to the channel. This is Mel's Gaming here with another The Hunter Classic video. Now today's video is going to be a selection of highlight clips from the past couple of days. However, I do just want to apologise for the first couple of clips being slightly lower in quality than the rest. I realised my recording software wasn't quite running at the quality I wanted it to be, but of course the animals had already been shot by that point and I couldn't re-record anything. But starting off here on Loggers Point, looking at a 200 to 250 mule deer buck. That is a monster mule deer. After spending so long trying to get a 200 plus, this was an awesome sight to see. And it's so funny because I had so many people say to me, go on Timber Gold trails, you'll get a bigger buck than that 200 that you got, and you probably would have had an easier time getting a buck to break that 200 mark on Timber Gold. But I never found anything bigger than like a 198. But both of my 200 pluses have now been from loggers, and this guy was obviously going to be bigger than the 200 I got in the last video, so I was really excited to see what he'd score. He does have a couple of short tines there on his left side, well, his right side, but the left side on screen, and I managed to drop him there with a heart and lung shot, 217.764. That is my new personal best by just over 17. And I am in love with the mule deer. I think they just look awesome in Classic. The racks are so cool, but you can really see where he will have lost some points with those couple of short tines on that side on the left of your screen. But a really decent buck that, of course, has to go to the lodge. Not a monster by a lot of people's standards, but a really good buck. And now on Timber Gold Trails, where I was actually looking for a non-tip muley. That's been my sort of goal for the past couple of days, is to try and get a non-typical. And I actually spotted this really decent sized wolf, 15 to 17 score estimate, but with a really broad looking head. And with things like wolves and bears, what you're looking for in Classic is a really broad head. They're scored off of their skull. So if they've got a broader head, they've got a higher chance of being a bigger animal. And this guy looked pretty broad. So I was quite confident I could just drop him here with the 9.3 as he was walking past, which I did, and he landed sort of just by the water. Not the best place for trying to get pictures of him, but he really does look to have a broad head as I walked over to him. And he was a 16.5677 scoring wolf. Just slightly bigger than my personal best one in the lodge, but nothing I was going to mount. It wasn't like a huge increase, it was just by a little bit. So just a decent number of GMs, but a very good wolf to see. And then moving over to Red Feather Falls, I had to hit record on the new recording software pretty quickly, as this piebald cow moose was right by the starting lodge. I'd barely gone a few hundred meters and I spotted this. Now, I have had a couple of piebald moose in Classic, including one bull, but you never turn down a rare in Classic because you never know when you're going to see one again. It's not like Call of the Wild where you'll probably see several of that rare eventually. Rares in Classic are much harder to find, and the trophy shot poses are so good. Make taking a good trophy shot of an animal like that so much more easy. And sticking on the same hunt from Red Feather Falls, I actually got this 160 to 205 estimate buck. And I was pretty confident he'd score somewhere in the 180s. Definitely a really good quality looking buck. He had looked like he had a good number of tines and a decent length of tines and pretty wide as well. So I was quite confident that he should score pretty high into that estimate. Nowhere near being a 200 though from pictures that I've seen. But definitely a buck I wanted to take out and probably take a trophy shot of if he was 180 plus. But he would have to be anything bigger than 197 to go to the lodge. But he was a 181.1024, so not something to go to the lodge, but anything over 180 for whitetail is amazing. And yeah, definitely a buck worth taking a trophy shot of. And really cool to get in the same hunt as a really nice rare. That was a very good hunt there on Red Feather Falls. Over on Val de Bois, I was hunting Alpine ibex, and after not seeing anything good for ages, I spotted this 190 to 295 estimate male. Now, the problem was he was in an area where if I shot him, I wouldn't actually be able to access him to claim him. But he looked pretty good. He had sort of curls that go back a bit more rather than straight up, because the ones with the really high curl don't tend to score very high. And he also had really dark horns, which they actually do get a small number of bonus points if they have the really, really dark horns. But eventually, he actually ran to a part of the cliff where if I shot him, he would slide all the way down and actually get to a point where I'd be able to claim him. Just like he does right here after I pop him in the shoulder there. And he goes right down to the bottom, and that's where I can then mark him and then go over to claim him. That was about 20 real minutes waiting for this ibex just to get into a position where I could actually take him. I really want a big Alpine ibex. I didn't think this guy would quite make it, but definitely a good one. I actually hit him in the lung. I thought I'd gone a little bit high into the shoulder. I always hit them in the shoulder. But 261.3895 is not a bad ibex. Looking for 270 for one, so still got to try and get a decent trophy one, but not a bad ibex at all. Over on White Hart Island, I had this 165 to 205 estimate whitetail come walking out of the brush. I was actually on White Hart looking for a non-typical whitetail. I really want to get a big non-tip, but this guy looked really quite a good buck. I was hoping he'd score decently. But I just had to include him just because he looks so good. I really, really love the whitetail in Classic. They look so much better with these kind of racks than the Call of the Wild bucks. Honestly, I really love the whitetail in Classic. They are one of my favourite species. Pretty much all the deer in Classic I love hunting, but it's just something about the whitetails. They really look fab. And I really hope that I can get a big non-tip. One of my friends got a really big non-tip recently, and that's kind of spurred me on to trying to get one again. So I thought that that's basically what I was looking for in this hunt. But when a buck like that walks out, you kind of do just have to stop and take it. But I was just kept range finding him until he got into a range that I was comfortable that I would take him with the bow. And the reason I wanted to take him with the bow is I actually got another buck run. So I had two bucks coming in at the same time. Now, I'm not even going to bother to show the other buck that came in. He was about 35 to 40 scoring buck. I never even bothered to shoot him. He was so ridiculously tiny in comparison. But managed to drop this big guy with the snakebite bow, which is always so satisfying. The bow hunting in Classic is honestly amazing. I love using the bows quite often more than the rifles. But yeah, just a really solid looking buck on the ground. I wasn't entirely sure he'd be 180s, and picking him up, he was a 171.5355. So not something I will even trophy shot, but just a buck I really wanted to show off as a good little highlight. And now moving on to my favourite animal of this entire video. That is a absolutely monstrous red deer here on Val de Bois. 185 to 280 scoring and max weight estimate. And that rack looked huge. I have been after a 270 plus red deer since I started playing this game. And honestly, I've shot a couple of 240s that just looked really big. But there was no mistaking this guy when he came over the hill. Now, I've actually decided to include more of this clip than I normally would, just because I want this guy to have more screen time, because that is such an impressive looking animal. The red deer in Classic just look so cool. They have just the biggest antlers, and I just had to show him off. After looking for one of this size for so long, I just really, really, really wanted to give him as much screen time as possible. What happened was I was actually walking along the river as I always do, looking for red deer, roe deer, fox, and I got a call from up on top of a bit of a cliff. So I decided I'd sit at the bottom on the opposite side of the river and give the red deer call a few goes. And I never heard another call come back from that side of the river. And then I just see something just moving, and it was this guy's antlers. So I quickly hit record, and then he was in that position where you guys saw him initially. And I was just in shock. I started quickly looking at some of my friends' trophy shots of their 270 plus red deer and just trying to compare like the shapes of the antler and everything. And this guy just looked like he was gonna make it. I had all of my fingers crossed, and I was waiting for him to come down off of that slope so that I could get a decent trophy shot of him. But that big slope sort of cliff thing up in front of me is where he called from on top of. And you can see there was roe deer in this area, there was a fox that was walking about, there was another very much smaller red stag hanging around as well. And I was kind of worried that any of those might come close and potentially spook. So I was trying to wait for him to get into the right area, but also not leave it too long where they would spook and that I'd have to spend ages tracking this guy. But just look at him. That is like a walking tree. Honestly, if they do a red deer great one for Call of the Wild, I hope they look at red deer in Classic and make them this wide and this just so much like a tree. It just looks amazing. And you can see that giving a call on the red deer cooler, which in Classic is so cool because it is like a carved piece of antler as well. It's just awesome. But at this point, he did start to head out across the river into the sunlight and into a place where I knew I should be able to get a good trophy shot. So I just had one last look at him through the scope here, and I decided that I would drop him here with the 9.3. And you can see there just completely flattens him and he falls over right there in the water. And I knew that that was going to be a decent enough place to actually get to him and get a picture. That is like when you have an animal coming down some terrain like that, if it is a trophy animal, it's worth giving it the extra couple of minutes just to get into a place that you can get a decent trophy picture, because that is such a big thing about Classic, is getting the trophy picture of the animal. And just look at how awesome this thing looks. That is incredible. Those tines, just amazing. The crowns on that antler, absolutely incredible. And he scored 272.7500. Absolute monster stag. Anything over 270 is good, but that beats a couple of my friends' personal bests, and it's definitely my personal best stag. So that is going to be it for this video, guys. I hope you've enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys again soon.